Hello and welcome to IR Thinker, where international affairs are discussed. I'm Martin Zupko. It is estimated that over 600,000 Afghans fled Afghanistan after August 2021, when the US military left the country. Many of them were following the dream of asylum in third countries. However, France 24 reported that over 345,000 Afghans have returned to their country or been deported since Pakistan in October 2023 ordered undocumented migrants or those who have overstayed their visas to leave. Now we have some clashes between Pakistan and Iran. Also in Afghanistan we have the government of Taliban. So today's issue is to speak about what's going to happen with those 600,000 estimated people who went to Pakistan. And my expert today is Ido Raz. Hello, Ido.
Hello. Good to be here, Martin.
Ido is a researcher focusing on the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, especially geopolitics and terrorism. He is also a PhD student of international relations at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, finance intelligence analyst, and the Middle Eastern Studies and Arabic graduates. Ido has also a very decent publication history, and I especially like the article that I found on the website of the Institute of National Security Studies in Tel Aviv that Ido wrote about the Pakistan-Israeli relations. Highly recommend to read it. So let's go to our topic, Ido. And we try to understand the situation in this region. So let's start with the first question. And I mean, for our viewers and students, what are the scale and humanitarian implications of the mass departure of Afghan refugees from Pakistan? What's going to happen with those people?
So I think before we deep in the big questions, we have to say a couple of words. That in a turned state like Afghanistan, an unstable country like Pakistan, it is always hard to reach an accurate measure of any crisis, and particularly the Afghan refugee crisis. One of the reasons it's so difficult for us, researchers and policymakers, to follow the scale and precisely the data and reports we get in our table, it comes from diverse interest groups and actors presenting different point of views and different picture. For instance, IGOs like the UN Refugee Agency and INGOs let's say the Human Rights Watch tend to show us a much complex picture of the refugees crisis on the one hand. And the other hand, let's say the Pakistani government documents would show us a different picture. So I think I always have to start with saying that. So after saying that, let's deep in the waters. So I think that the humanitarian implications of the Afghans refugees are really devastating. I mean, firstly, after the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan in August 2021, between 600 to 700,000 people, as you said, of Afghans immigrated to neighboring Pakistan, mainly fearing what's to come. So some of them were officials and personals in the last regime, journalists, human rights activists, that realized that once the Taliban 2.0 will return, as it did back in power, they would face persecution, execution, rape, arrest, and more. And as for the women, the lack of ability to work. So those people will likely to face the humanitarian violation, as I said, after crossing the Duran line, the border, back to the Afghan side. So this is the first part. Secondly, as a known Game of Thrones quote says, the winter is coming in the Himalayas. So for at least, 400,000 people, the returned refugees, it already came and stuff. Some of the refugees have no place to come to when they come back to Afghanistan, where some of them actually are Pakistan born, and their parents migrated to Pakistan back in the Soviet invasion in 1979. So for those undocumented Afghans that even some of them didn't were 1 second in their lives in Afghanistan, coming back is actually coming back to nothing. So hence, they are likely to face homelessness, poverty, and most importantly, an inability to cope with the winter. This is another section. So thirdly, this time from the Pakistan side, some of the refugees already have raised families in their time in Pakistan. Some of them, as I said, were a lot of years there. So I saw an interview in one of the biggest media outlets with an anonymous Pakistani who had to leave its Pakistani wife and kids that were burned in Pakistan and re-immigrate to Afghanistan. So there is some cases that you have raised your family, the Pakistani family, and now you have to leave them to Afghanistan. So I think from a broader perspective, 1.6 or 1.7 million refugees that come to Afghanistan and do aggravate the economic situation in the country after they will come. I mean, for a country with a population of 40 million people, in which 95% of them are eating insufficiently, according to the UN's reports, the added people, the added refugees, will not ease the situation, of course. For the Taliban, de facto authorities in Afghanistan, it creates a complex situation because they try to avoid the interference in their internal affairs on the one hand, but they have no choice but to collaborate this time with the U.S. agencies and other NGOs to take care of the mass returning Afghans on the other hand. So I think this is how I would see the scale of this crisis.
What difficulties do returning Afghans face in a home country? Because we know that when you are in another country and you want to return is not a big deal because you can always cross the country because you are leaving. But the big deal is to return in a safety place where you are received as a human being. So can you please elaborate how those people are received in Afghanistan?
So I think I would start with what could happen because we don't know much. So as we discussed before, coming back to a Taliban-led state isn't an ideal situation for most of the people, and in particular for the Afghans who escaped from this radical regime in the first place. So besides the poverty, and so many refugees could be used for the Taliban purposes, as we saw in the history in other extreme-led states, like let's say Syria and Libya. And to be more specific, we saw Assad Syria, how returning people from Lebanon, for example, has been recruited for the Syrian First Division of the army or been brought to arrest for under conditions. In Libya, returning refugees have been killed and robbed by militants and on their way back home to the homeland. So there's just two examples of a large documented experience of migrants returning home. So this could be one of the potential causes. In another scenario, the returning Afghans could find themselves joining criminal and even terrorist activity after lacking out of options because of poverty. If we want to be more particular, so in the last 2 years, we have seen an increase of the Khorasan Islamic State branch in Afghanistan, in the region, which mainly, as I said, concentrated in Afghanistan and also Pakistan. So the ISIS-K manages a recruitment system that operates by a couple of propaganda media outlets in many languages. in order to recruit diverse origin of Muslim in Central Asia. So these people coming to nothing, this ISIS-K activity could find themselves cooperating with each other. At the same time, we also see an increase in another terrorist group in the region, the Pakistani Taliban, that operates between the Durand line, the two sides, whom we will talk about later, that also could attract Afghans to its ranks, and especially the Pashtuns migrates that we will come back, that would come back, sorry. So that's about it. I would say that the Taliban said that it put some tents, some refugee camps near the border in the Afghan side to help the people returning back, and we'll try to find them some jobs, but I don't know how much it really happens. I don't see a lot of picture from that, or any people, journalists saying that it's really happening. So this is what the Taliban in their side said does happen.
Ido, I want to ask you, like, do we have any information? How does it look over there? Because, you know, when you have like 300, 500 people, they can go to the country and they can disappear in some way. But when you have 300,000 and another 300,000 are basically waiting to return or to go to Afghanistan, that's a mass of people. It's like, you know, it's like one city basically. So do we have any information how those people are received in Afghanistan in terms of crossing the border? They cross the border and then what?
I think, as I said, I don't know. I didn't see any documented or people interviewing for news saying what happened there. So I think it's a bigger problem in Afghanistan that after the Taliban came in power, so all the media outlets are being restricted. As I saw last month, an NGO of Afghan journalists that moved from the country said how much the media there is not, like in a democratic state that you can report anything you have. The ministry there is really strict. So, like in other countries, in this situation, we don't see a lot of things coming out from there. What I can say is how I know the international community is being helpful or not helpful for these situations. So, beside human rights interest groups like the UN-related organizations, the refugee crisis didn't shake the international community as it should, or as we think it supposed to be should. Although the two world's biggest power, the United States and China, showed some kind of interest in pressure regarding the crisis, we didn't see they didn't use as much power as they could to prevent or narrow the Pakistani decision. Washington, from its side, which has a long history, as we know, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, held a high-level diplomatic discussion in Pakistan about a week after the Pakistani decision. In retrospect, the decision fell short, or maybe the U.S. just wanted, to fulfill its obligation as the world's biggest power. On the other hand, China's ambassador to Afghanistan stated that the Pakistan decision is against human rights and harms good neighborliness. So Beijing also gave Kabul a humanitarian package referring to the refugees, but not more than that. So this is what the big powers or the big nations gave to the refugees to help them or to minor the crisis. One of the reasons, I think, for this maybe minor response from the international community lies on the other background events that occur in our time in the international arena. such as Russia-Ukraine war, and afterwards Israel-Hamas war that started just after the Pakistani decision, which, by the way, has already extended into a wider conflict involving Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and so. So with that being said, the world interest focused moved from Afghanistan, let's say in about 2021, to Ukraine, and so things. So that is why I think both US and China aren't so keen to help the Afghans, and of course other countries. But I spoke about the bigger ones because most of the movement, I would say, with the decisions that are being transited in the world is most being influenced by those two. So what's interesting is China is slowly but surely starting to attach Afghanistan to the Belt and Road Initiative. One of the critical factors for it is to succeed to balance and mediate between Kabul and Islamabad, by the way, about the refugee crisis. Therefore, they didn't put any pressure on Pakistan on this occasion. So they want to be, I would say, on the bridge. So they didn't do any drastic things in this occasion.
And Ido, is there any chance that Pakistan will change the decision about those visas and undocumented migrants?
If I would had to answer in one word, so no. But diving in the question, there is a small odd it will happen. As we know, Pakistan is facing a big political crisis. They have now a temporary government. So I don't know, it maybe would be depend on which government will be selected. So for an instance, we know that one of the biggest political officials, or one of the big main characters in Pakistan, Fazlur Rahman, is head of the JUI political parties that maybe will be voted in the next elections. Has been he went this month to Afghanistan to meet with the Taliban officials in order to improve the connection between the countries. So maybe if, let's say, he would be elected in the next elections, Pakistan will do one thing or another regarding the crisis. But I'm not so optimistic. I think it's maybe for his voters or potential voters, he does what he does. So that's about it. We can see how Pakistan has managed this crisis, and we can dive in a little bit if you want about how it managed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So
absolutely,
I think with understanding the Pakistani action, we could see why it's not why I'm not optimistic that this decision would be changed. So we can dive in the Pakistani actions as I see it in two main levels: the governmental level and the regional, or I would say tactical level.
Okay.
So I would start further with the lower one, where I think it's interesting movements are made. I think that Pakistan is using many types of push factors to increase and speed up the deportation to Afghanistan of the refugees. For example, and I will quote one of the NGO's reports about it from October 2023, it said that Pakistani government is using threats, abuse, and detention to coerce Afghan asylum seekers without legal status to return to Afghanistan or face deportation by November 1st, 2023. So this is about it. Moreover, there's several indications that the Pakistani police demanded bribes and the property, jewelry, and homes of these undocumented Afghans. And even some women said they faced sexual assault by the policemen. So add those facts to the fact that the asylum seekers waiting to depart to a third country rather than returning to Afghanistan would be charged more than $800 for overstaying their visas or not posing documents to stay legally. In other words, an amount of money that those, let's say, refugees could not afford. So it's make their wish to deport to a third country rather than returning to the Taliban-led Afghanistan unrealistic, and it pushes back to Afghanistan. So this is on the lower level or the tactical level, one of the push factors. At the governmental level, Pakistan acts more calculated and carefully due to its international criticism. For instance, while the final decision for deportation was the 1st of November 2023, Islamabad decided to extend the deadline to the 29th of February 2024 for Afghans who wait for documents. So it's, I don't know if it really matters, but it's something. To accelerate the deportation process, Pakistan opened more borders crossing for the mission, which makes it's about 5 border crossing just for this cause. I think it shows how important for them is to complete this mission of the refugees as quickly as it can. By the way, the Pakistani government stated that 90% of the 450,000 people who have already returned to Afghanistan since September did it voluntarily. So, as we said before, we can see the difference between the human rights reports and the Pakistani reports, and I think it's important to say that too. So, after talking about the Pak side, let's talk a little bit of the Afghan side. So, basically, the Taliban Ministry of Refugees said that it placed, as I told, the returning people in the temporary camps and try to find them jobs. By the way, it's really tough because we have realized that since the Taliban came back in power in August 2021, the people in Afghanistan have faced big increase in the unemployment rate, about more than 100%. So, meanwhile, the World Health Organization, the WHO, it provides, as we know, right? I didn't see any pictures. Health services to returning Afghans, and the UN International Organization for Migration provide them with shelter, water, food, and essential household items. So it's important to mention, however, that the UN still calls for urgent support for the returning Afghans who stay under very challenging conditions. So really, I don't know what is happening really on the ground, but this is what they say.
Naturally, some people might ask a question that it's been like 2.5 years since those people came to Pakistan. So why now? What's the time frame of this decision to get rid of those people like at that time? Because as you said, Pakistan is politically unstable, so it's quite a big operation for Pakistan to complete at this current stage and the conditions of political climate in Pakistan.
Yeah, so I think in order to to open this question and answer it step by step, it's a really key question. We have to go back and understand the actors' current dynamics since the Taliban raised in power. So from a very start, the Taliban presence as the ruler in Afghanistan, Pakistan started suffering from a significant increasement of the terror attacks inside the country, mainly in the areas near the border with Afghanistan. We are talking just to make it clear about, I think, 645 militant attacks that took the lives of nearly 1,000 Pakistanis just in 2023 alone. Okay, it's an increase of 500% in the terrorist attacks since the Taliban takeover. So we see what Pakistan faces. So dealing with this security crisis, Pakistan first blames and still blames the Taliban for letting and helping the parallel organization, the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, to execute these attacks in its territory. So it's really dramatic because for 20 years we knew about a good relationship between the Taliban and Pakistan. And suddenly, after taking back power, the Taliban went against its previous ally. So firstly, Pakistan hosted many diplomatic high-level and tactical level talks and to try and stop the Taliban from assisting the TTP and stop the terror attacks. So first it tried diplomatically. Actually, those efforts are still taking place. We have to mention that after the Taliban denied and still denies the connection with the TTP, the rhetoric deteriorated while the terrorist attack continued. Meanwhile, the Taliban government, who couldn't find any solution for the security crisis that continued, inside the country had to take some action. So the caretaker government led by Prime Minister Anwar al-Kakar eventually took the decision of the refugees to deportation because he indicated that some of these undocumented Afghans were behind the TTP attacks in the country. So this big decision he took. After we talked about the backend story, what caused, I think, mainly the deportation decision. First of all, we have to mention that the crisis, the economic crisis in Pakistan, is maybe one of the other factors that driven the prime minister to make this decision. So maybe it's another factor in this decision. So after talking about the background story, we see it's from August 2021, it's a continuous snowball in the downtrend of the Af-Pak relations. So we can see that by the response of the Taliban leaders calling this act non-Muslim, I think it's a big words for accusing the Pakistani that are a Muslim country, a proud Muslim country, call them non-Muslim. We see by that the severity of the act. From this point forward, I think it could go into two directions. So the first one, what I found unlikely, is that this action will lower the flames between the Taliban and the Pakistani government, as the Taliban will be deterred from the action. I think this is what the Pakistani government wanted in the first place, but I find it unlikely. I think that the other place it could go, as we see on the ground, by the way, as there is an increase in the TTP and related terrorist group attacks in Pakistan, other Taliban would want to respond to Islamabad decision indirectly. In this kind of response, we have already witnessed the Tariq-e-Jihad, Pakistan, it's a new wing of the TTP, took responsibility of some attacks against the Pakistani soldiers in early November. So I think this option is really taking place on the ground, not as the Pakistani wanted in the first place.
In terms of terrorism, can you Ido sum up, which groups are operating, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and between, so our viewers have sort of like little summary, because I think there are more elements, and we need to clarify who is who.
Wow, every day I open the news, I find new terrorist groups. So I think it's it's really hard to follow all the because I think on the ground everybody takes a name of a new cell of a new part of a terrorist organization. So I will talk about the three main
Okay.
groups that are operating in this ground. So, as I said, I think the biggest is the ISIS-K, the ISIS Khorasan, that have big implication on the Afghan and Pakistan policy. So not just them, other of the Central Asia countries. So it has a big increase in the recruitment and attacks since 2021. We see it, the UN talks about it a lot. Many experts around the world try to avoid or balance their attacks. So this is the first group. The other group, as I said, it's what I called the Afghan Taliban's allies. So we can mention by that the bigger one is Tariq-e-Taliban, what we call the TTP, Pakistani Taliban in short. So they are behind most of the attack in Pakistan. We see them operate from Afghanistan into the Pakistan borders. They are in a very similar ideology like the Afghan Taliban. So they want to replace the government in Pakistan into like the Taliban government in Afghanistan, as they call a Muslim or Islamic regime, as they see it. So they are, most of them are Pashtuns, like most of the Afghan Taliban. So we have to mention that they have a very close connection as the same ethnic group. This is the second one. We can attach them to the Al Qaeda and other smaller organizations in the area. As we see from 2021, Al Qaeda is not operating in big scales. It's mainly training in Afghanistan. So we didn't see much from them, maybe assisting, but not more than that. So this is a second group. The third group, we see some Baluch organizations, like Balochistan BLF, Liberation Army or Liberation Front, or in the Iranian side, as we see, as we saw not long ago, Jaish al-Adl. So many Baluch organizations that want to let's say, replace the government in their areas, Balochistan, the historic Balochistan, and prepare them at a state of their own. So this is the three main organizations. One of the purposes of those organizations is not just harming civilians or Pakistani soldiers or something like that. It's also targeting Chinese people, Chinese workers, in order to replace the Chinese dominance that is growing in the areas, in order to, as I said, to replace and harden the Pakistani government.
I think it's also very useful to say that because I think people see Afghanistan as a country with like sort of hills. You know, we hear all those stories about the caves, people in the villages, and all those. But in 2010, the British Independent published the article, Afghanistan's resources could make it the richest mining region on Earth, because they stated that Pentagon and the US Geological Survey, they discovered that Afghanistan is sitting on 1 trillion of untapped minerals. So you know, what we see on the surface is not what is under the surface of Afghanistan. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, you know, this might attract many Chinese companies because China needs resources. And Afghanistan, you know, geopolitically is, you know, quite close to China as we have a look at the map, you know. So I think that's also quite interesting to elaborate on. So let's tap a little bit economics, you know, like what is the relation between Afghanistan and Pakistan in terms of economics, trade? Are those countries collaborating, or they don't have, you know, official diplomatic relations?
First of all, most of the Taliban economy is based on the trade with Pakistan. We have to mention that. So in this case, also Pakistan had a big leverage over Taliban's decision. Let's say in the last week, they closed one of the main crossing borders between the countries that led to a big decrease in the export between the countries. So it's a big it's a big harm for the Taliban regime. So they have really big economic relations due to its neighboring parts, and I think that also the cultural and ethnic closeness. So I think this is maybe the main character I would say about how I would define the connection between the countries. So this is about it. I think that talking about China, we as I said, they're trying surely, but they know what they're doing to connect Afghanistan into the Belt and Road initiative. So they're big. They're doing big project in Pakistan, like the CPEC. It's a project that will make China, I don't know, connect with the Arab Sea. So they know Afghanistan is a very strategic place. So they're trying to engage more and more with the Taliban, even though they they didn't recognize officially the Taliban regime, but they have an open embassy in Kabul. They have many meetings in China, in Afghanistan with officials, with economy related people. So this is about it. I think if we're talking more about geopolitics, so after the US and NATO had left Afghanistan in 2021, this whole decrease of relations between Taliban and Pakistan comes of a result from it. So for 20 years, things in Afghanistan and Pakistan come as a result of the American presence in the region. So now, after they left, they started some sort of a vacuum in the region. So meanwhile, the Taliban had to get some help and shelter from Pakistan in the 20 years Americans were in the country, which Pakistan thought to make one day a proxy or a puppet regime after the American withdrew. However, the Taliban had different plans, as we know, and as a new actor, it used the regional vacuum of power and wanted to change the balance of power between the Taliban and Pakistan. So therefore, the Taliban used the TTP, the proxy tool, to balance Pakistan's power in order to leverage it into the diplomatic spectrum. As mentioned, to this day, no government recognizes the Taliban as a regime in Afghanistan. So putting pressure on Pakistan might be one of the Taliban's aim, its policy. The Taliban knows that Pakistan faces tough times, so increasing its security and stability is a key to bettering the positions of the Taliban. So after saying that, I think that also China saw this opportunity of the vacuum of power and tried to get more involvement in the region, we saw it in after some talks between the Taliban and Pakistan regarding the security challenge. So China mediated between the sides a couple of times. So it tries to be, let's say, the new big actor in the region, but very, very slowly, not to dig more than it should in the Afghan mud.
Also, some people say, and this is some sort of interesting to hear, that majority of those problems between Pakistan and Afghanistan, they come from the fact of the border, which was established by colonial powers. What's your opinion about it? That in some way, some people, they theorize, if they could change the border based on the ethnicity and all those people who have been living there for centuries, those problems would be much less in the scale of conflict than they are at the moment.
So I think as someone that lives in the Middle East and see it in the everyday life, I think this is a colonial present they left us. So yeah, I think it's true. The borders are a big challenge, or makes a big crisis is in South Asia and the Middle East, and so the Durand line that had put between, as you said, in 1893, I think. So it divided the Pashtuns and other communities into two. So it made up that till today, Afghanistan, it doesn't matter if the Taliban regime or others, previous regimes, didn't recognize the line, the border. So it's make it another opportunity for extremist organizations to give it, I don't know, a purpose to hit other countries. So the Taliban also said to Pakistan it doesn't recognize the fence or the borderline. There's the fence is not the border, right? It's like more than 2,000 kilometers. So it gives them a good excuse for that, and by saying sometimes we didn't operate in Pakistan because it's Afghanistan. So it's a really difficult, and also to the people, the normal people living in the two sides of the lines. Some families, some more connections that are now facing two countries. So it's really difficult, and it makes it challenging both diplomacy and both security.
When you mentioned diplomacy, what's about diplomatic relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan? Do you see any diplomatic activities going on to sort out that crisis?
I think it's quite interesting because, as I said, as I thought, and many people thought after the Taliban came to power, they would be good allies. So they have a really long years relation between the two parties. So, but I think the Taliban had different plans in the first place. So they knew that the Pakistan would be looking at them from up, and they wanted to balance the relations. So there is a lot of diplomatic activity between the countries, a lot, in many levels. But as I see on the ground, there is not a lot of results. On the one hand, Pakistan says to the Taliban, don't help the TTP, and so and so. On the other hand, Afghanistan, the Taliban de facto authorities tell them we're not doing nothing. So stop blaming us. And it really, as I said, a big snowball that goes on and goes on. And the reality, it's hard for both sides, mainly for Pakistan that need to cooperate on the one hand with Taliban, and on the other hand, they know they are behind most of the attacks in their country. So it's make it really complicated.
And based on your research, do you think that this crisis needs sort of mediator or an actor who can help to Pakistan and Afghanistan to come to the solution? And if so, who that actor might be?
So I think the actor is now trying to mediate the most is China, as I said. It has a big leverage in the region, as Pakistan really needs China's help economically in the everyday life. And Afghanistan is more and more signing projects with China. So I would say in the next years, the countries would be really depend on China economically. So this is the first option. I think that Qatar that mediate more and more conflicts in the world. Let's say now Israel and Hamas. It takes more and more regional and bigger place in the mediation between two states. So I think Qatar, as it has good relations with the Taliban use them to mediate between them and the US. They have the Taliban has an office opening for the last, I don't know, a lot of years in Qatar. So I think Qatar as an Islamic regime would be good to mediate between the sides, but until the Taliban would want this engagement, it wouldn't be happen. So I think the problem is the Taliban. They didn't want this relationship at this current time, this power distribution with Pakistan, and no actor would change that for now.
Let's touch a little bit culture. What do you think? How are the culture and social dynamics affected in both countries? Because it's a mass of people, and at some point, those people, they might leave, they might have some jobs, they might influence the culture. And as we say, we're talking about 600,000 people, plus minus. So what do you think about those dynamics?
I didn't see any grand changes in the dynamics between the countries socially. I think that on the one hand, Pakistan is trying to reduce the size of the situation. We don't see a lot of diplomatic action regarding the refugees, and even the Pakistani media doesn't talk about the crisis a lot. It's not in the front headlines. Until the Iranian attacks in Pakistan 3 days ago, the majority of the headlines in the Pak newspaper were dedicated to the Israeli-Hamas war. I think that in today's media-driven reality, social trends are often influenced by what in the front pages on news outlets and social media platforms. In addition, I saw a couple of Pakistani human rights activists and journalists criticizing the refugee decision. I think it's maybe a pattern, but I don't know. Most of them are doing that quietly, and I don't know, in the back of their articles. I think in this kind of country that who is really controlling it, it's the army. So you won't criticize publicly this kind of a decision. So that's about it.
What about the ethnicity? What is the role of ethnicity in this crisis? And also, if you can perhaps briefly explain who are Pashtuns? Is it a tribe? Is it a nation that has no country? How can we understand Pashtuns properly?
So I'm not a big expert of tribes, but I know that Pashtuns live in the what's called Pashtunistan, the area. I don't know really the borders, but in Google, I think it will give us a good example between but the Durand line had cut them into two. So in this kind of area, so it's an old tribe, a big ethnic group that, as I said, divided between the countries. And I think it's one of the most challenging thing in this refugee crisis and the dividing of Pakistan and Afghanistan. So I don't know if how is the connections between the people on the ground between the two sides, but I assess that there is a family relations and other relations. As we saw, like in the Taliban first grew in the madrasas in the Pakistani side, but moved afterwards to Afghanistan.
Let's go to one of the most complicated questions, and this is a long-term policy for Afghanistan and Pakistan to sort out this crisis. Do we have any proposals, maybe some ideas that you researched?
So unfortunately, I really don't know and didn't see any long-term solution for this challenge. Pakistan is already in a big mess, politically, economically, security. So these refugees aren't in their first priority. And we talked a lot about how they wanted to push them as quick as they could. So actually, they basically just wanted to get rid of them, in other words. So yet there is a small chance, as we talked, that if the Rahman, a political led party, the JUI, will be elected this year, we will see a different approach from Islamabad to Kabul, and maybe a different decision about the refugees. Rahman, as I said, already met with the Taliban officials in Kabul this month and expressed his view to improve the engagement between the countries. On the other hand, Afghanistan doesn't have really nothing to do except to deter or maybe put more other pressure on Islamabad to reduce this kind of decisions. So I feel it's really complex. The two countries are really unstable, and it's hard to question any long-term solutions on anything.
Do you think that this crisis can escalate into conflict? Like, for instance, there is a Afghan military or Afghan forces coming to the border, and maybe the same from the Pakistani side, because as we see, now Pakistan is busy with Iran. And I'm thinking, if they open the second front, that might have some implication on Pakistan and region.
If we look back on the timeline between the Taliban that took power and today, so we saw a couple of incidents in the border. We saw, I think in 2022, I don't remember the current month, but Pakistan attacked with airplanes, missiles in Afghanistan territory in order to target the TTP terrorists. So afterwards, it led to a big downtrend, another one in the relationship between the countries. And some incidents occurred between Pak soldiers and or TDP or Taliban soldiers in another hand. We don't really know the difference. It's hard to see it because, as I said, it's really the same tribes, the same people. Today I'm TTP, today I'm Afghan Taliban. It's really hard to see the difference. So it's already begun. So this whole situation is part of what depended on what happened in these 3 almost years. So I think that either side doesn't want to open a second front, but it's like a calculated deterrence between the sides in order to, as I said, to balance the decisions between the actors. I think one day it will break even and stop, but until then, both sides will do what they know best and to leverage the situation to their sides.
I think it's also important to mention that Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and if there is political instability and a bit of chaos, we don't know what's going to happen with those weapons. As you said, there are different groups operating in Pakistan, and I think international community should pay more attention to Pakistan, because this is quite crucial that we are speaking about country with nuclear weapons. So that makes a big difference geopolitically, but also in terms of international security. And I think, you might know better than me that it's super important to have secure nuclear weapons like silos or those storages, so they are secure. That's my thought about this, conflict.
Yeah, so I think I should have started with saying that Pakistan is the only Muslim nuclear country. So it's we have to put it in front and say that I think that Pakistan will never target Afghanistan with a nuclear or a large scale of attack. There is two good relation throughout the years, ethnical and cultural. ties between the countries. But I think this whole world dynamics coming from Ukraine and throughout Gaza and Israel and Yemen and Red Sea and so and so. So saying that with adding the fact that Pakistan is very unstable in these times, the world biggest powers in the international community has to look in with two eyes directly into Pakistan to see it doesn't goes too much catastrophic. So it's a really annoying situation that a nuclear country is so unstable and you don't know what the presence will give you. So I think who should be most in charge is Saudi Arabia, that it's really giving a lot of Pakistanis Pakistan government money, and help to build the nuclear ability. So it has a lot of how you say it, percentage in the Pakistani this project. So they should be really looking towards Pakistan and to make sure that it doesn't fall.
Ido, you are researching Pakistan, Afghanistan, and that whole region. Can you please tell us what are the challenges when you are researching that region? And also, on the other hand, what fascinates you?
The biggest challenge is mis- and disinformation.
Okay.
So, as someone that lives in the Middle East, I see how much the mass of informations come to me, and some of them is half truth, some of it is not the truth, and some of it it's really good information. So when we are talking about an area I didn't live in or have been a lot of time in, so you can read a lot, but you have to see which reference is the best or close to reality, and you need to know which people to depend on, and it's make it really challenging. What desires me, I think, when you're talking about Afghanistan and Pakistan, you can't say one sentence about geopolitics without saying a word about security and tribes, and it makes it really challenging and complex to research this region. Every day I learn something new, something I didn't know, a new terrorist cell that comes up, a new fact I didn't know. It's really reachable and historically countries. And that's about it, I think.
And what about collaboration with Pakistani and Afghan scholars?
So most of the time I have a few scholars that I talk to. As my country hasn't or doesn't have really a relationship with those countries till now, so it's make it more complex, and need to do it slow, but people are good and collaborating, and at the end of the day we are all humans that want peace and stability. So in the end of the day it's work.
And what about the research areas? Which research areas, when it comes to Pakistan and Afghanistan, in terms of geopolitics and security, do you consider as important, maybe a bit underestimated, but still very important for the international community, that maybe our viewers or our students can touch, and maybe they can write some papers or even collaborate with you?
It's hard to mention which current area, but I think Kandahar, as we know, there was in Netflix a good movie about Kandahar, so people can watch. I think this area are being the new de facto capital of the Taliban. So the most of the influential people, the people that lead the country, the Taliban, is living there, and all the main activity is happening there. So I think to dive in this area would be a good place to research. I think that the the meetings between the um, between Taliban officials and Pakistani officials and others, the main meetings will be there because, as we know, the Taliban is an Islamic group, so sometimes the government isn't the one that has been the decision maker. Sometimes it's the more religious actors in the group. So I think this place will be more influential in the next times.
Ido, thank you very much for your time, for your insightful thoughts and remarks about this complicated, complex, but still extremely important topic in terms of international security and geopolitics.
Thank you very much, Martin.